Before Ryuk could utter another word, the aquatic man blitzed forward, a fiery blue wave of energy spiraling behind him as he appeared before Ryuk a literal blink later, piercing out powerfully with his trident. Boom! A horrific shockwave boomed out as Ryuk reacted instinctively, smashing out with his punch, but the tip of the trident exploded out with a blue wave of energy that scorched his hand, sending him rapidly spinning uncontrollably downward. His hearing barely caught the sound of movement once more, and then, bang! Heavy explosions resounded through the entire area as piercing trident mages flashed all around Ryuk, and he punched out furiously. Yet, it slowly tore apart his body, ripping through nanobots and skin. Boom! After an attack that sent him flying backward, the scythe suddenly magnified, reaching close to 50 meters in pure height. A loud roar boomed out of the lips of the aquatic man as he slammed down with the edge of the scythe, flinging it toward Ryuk. A groan of pain left Ryuk's lips as his hand grabbed into the edge of the scythe, the feeling of trying to lift a mountain overwhelming him. And then, the scythe ripped through his body, nailing him down faster as Ryuk was sent smashing into the ground. Boom! A powerful wave of sand and shockwave emanated out from where he collapsed as one of the trident's sharp edges dug into his stomach, pinning him onto the ground. Blood slowly slipped out from Ryuk's lips as his eyes slowly moved up, looking at the aquatic man who calmly floated down from above, his eyes filled with disdain and pride. He arrived before the scythe, his hand grabbing onto it, and then he twisted it within Ryuk's body before he tore it out, a bloody wave splashing out into the water as the scythe returned to its normal height. "What are your last wishes?" the aquatic man asked, as Ryuk's lips, covered in blood, slowly opened up. And then, "How disappointing. Really, really disappointing," he said, as the aquatic man's eyes flashed in the next instant. The sound of an object tearing through flesh rang out as the scythe's edge pierced into Ryuk's neck. And with it, the aquatic man slowly lifted him, as Ryuk's entire body dangled on the scythe. "You know, I expected you to be madder about your beast dying. After all, I would be maddest if any of my beasts died. But isn't it pathetic? After your previous beast got ripped into two, all you have in your eyes is pride and disdain. I thought I would encounter much charisma from a beast tamer, but you're just an arrogant piece of trash in the end. And you're a half-dead intruder, hanging pathetically on the edge of a scythe, about to lose your life. I would say you're more disappointing than I could ever be. Wouldn't you agree?" the aquatic man said as he twisted the scythe in Ryuk's neck, the edge tearing out of the back of his neck before swinging it around as Ryuk's head bent unnaturally to the side. "About to lose my life, you say? Ha ha ha." Ryuk laughed out to the words, even as he felt his body slammed into the ground with the scythe. Yet all he did was laugh out like a madman. "You're an ignorant fool." Suddenly, the temperature below the sea began dropping. His eyes flashed when he saw the water beneath him start solidifying, and in the next instant, he shot upward with speed as the entire water around Ryuk turned instantly to ice. Any water that touched that ice was like it got infected, as it was also enveloped in ice crystals. He looked at the ice slowly spreading, and then, the ice shattered into pieces as a figure stepped out. A figure with translucent skin and snowy white hair that flashed with intense, snowy white light. His eyes were fully blue, and they looked at him with the coldest of light. But that wasn't what was horrifying about him. What was horrifying was the cold. The abysmal cold that made the aquatic man repeatedly step backward, even though the ice wasn't even heading toward him. "You? What are you?" the aquatic man asked in shock as Ryuk's lips opened, instant white smoke puffing out. And without saying any more words, he slowly raised up his hands and interlocked both fingers together as he whispered, "Domain expansion," Ryuk uttered, as the gaze of the figure massively changed. And in the next instant, his scythe twisted in his hand, and he slammed the butt of it on the ground. In the next instant, a powerful wave of blue swam toward him, seeking to hurt him yet. "Winter's solace." The words rang out calmly, as the blue wave that emanated from the trident paused in the air as the world instead turned into that of ice. Everything froze up, absolute and completely. The crashing waves stopped in their tracks before, quickly, a ball of ice formed over both Ryuk's and the aquatic man's figures. The entire world had changed, and now it was a world of ice and snow. Grent's eyes were widened in shock as he paused in his step, eyes looking around in disbelief. 1 second. 1 second was all it took, and when he opened his eyes, he was in this world of eternal whiner. His hands quickly tried gripping the trident harder, but then his eyes flashed in shock when he felt himself unable to clench his fingers. He tried to look downwards to see why, but his neck refused to move, seemingly having been hung in place by some mysterious force. I can't move? He asked himself in shock. But then, a figure soon appeared in the snowy world, calmly walking forward toward him. It's you, Grent tried to say, but his lips refused to move as he watched Ryuk calmly walk toward him, soon arriving mere inches before him, before his hand shifted to the side, and then silvery light boomed as an object was formed before it solidified. And when it finally settled, it was none other than a massive scythe of close to 3 meters in length oozing with horrific cold. And then, Ryuk slowly raised it up, as the shadow of the weapon loomed over Grent, whose eyes paled in horror. And then it fell. No. At the bottom of the dark, silent ocean, where no sunlight dares to reach. The water is thick, cold, and still. Ancient pressure crushed all around, and the only sound is the faint groan of shifting currents and the eerie hum of deep-sea life. The seafloor is a barren graveyard of forgotten bones, broken ships, and shattered relics cloaked in eternal shadow. Amidst the gloom, a strange sight disturbs the silence. A perfectly spherical ball of ice, hovering unnaturally in the water, suspended like a frozen moon. It glowed faintly over the seabed below. Suddenly, cracks began to spread across its surface, delicate, like veins in a glass orb before. Boom! It splintered forth into chaos, mist rising as it opened. And finally, the figure within was revealed. An ordinary young man floating in the cold water, his mere existence bringing massive amounts of coldness into the water around him. But his hands were outstretched, and in them, he held a piece of blue hair, wet and drifting softly. The sight of a figure who possessed nothing but a head and neck, from below nothing but dark blood gushing out endlessly. The figure's eyes still held shock and horror, mouth agape, coated in blood as it looked toward Ryuk's own dull eyes. You monster! Grent said in horror as Ryuk rolled his eyes emptily. Monster? Me, a monster? Am I the one who ordered his beasts to swallow me up before I even saw them? Or the first to send a scythe ripping through my neck and then stood idly watching as it twisted within and drew blood? But somehow, I'm the monster now? Ryuk said with a distant, hollow eye roll. But then, his gaze sharpened, and he continued, I'll keep it simple. With your body lost, you'll have about 10 seconds before you truly, fully die. But I'll preserve your life for an hour. Mainly because I'm an infinitely benevolent soul, and second, because I want you to lead me back to wherever you came from. Who knows, maybe when we get there, I won't mind throwing you to the mud. And if you're lucky, you might even find a way, some shaman or whatever, to make you survive. TCH. The aquatic man clicked his tongue in dissatisfaction. Or, of course, you can choose to refuse, and I'll just throw your head down and continue my search. Took me 3 days to find you. I bet it won't take much more to find where your true home is. I'd rather save that time, though. So what do you think? Die unnoticed? Or risk a chance at hope? Ryuk offered as the man's eyes flashed. But then he noticed a blue aura surrounding his neck, and after 10 seconds had passed and he was still not dead, a bit of joy coated his heart. He had already lost his heart and no doubt should have been dead in under 10 seconds. And yet, he was still alive. It was just as Ryuk promised. Perhaps, maybe, just perhaps, there was a chance of surviving. And if he follows me back, he will be met with a race of warriors that will take him down, bringing an end to him. Okay, fine. The figure screamed out loud as he felt his head slowly flipped from Ryuk's fingers whose eyebrows creased. He had thought he would be stubborn still, and just as he was about to leave him to his death, he surprisingly agreed. "Oh, good then. Where to head?" he asked, as he slowly turned his eyes to the side and Ryuk swam forward toward the place. Time passed as he kept moving diagonally and randomly through the sea under the guidance of Grent. After swimming around awkwardly and aimlessly, passing areas where Ryuk felt they had already been, they finally came before a ground that was shining with remnants of blue light as Ryuk's eyes flashed. On the ground, there was the image of a strange creature, a creature that looked humanoid except with a fishtail beneath, inscribed onto the ground. "That is the portal to the Lantis Kingdom. Splash my blood on the tails and it'll open up," Grent said as Ryuk stretched out his hand holding its head and wriggled it, sending splashes of blood over the tail on the image. And in the next instant, a strange pulse undulated from the source of the tail image, and Ryuk stepped back as he watched the tail shimmer with a blue aura that slowly opened a portal on the ground. "There it is. The entrance," he said as Ryuk's eyes flashed. If Ryuk had been searching, it most likely would have taken him more than 3 days to find this. And even if he did, he would have needed Grent's body to activate the portal, which he definitely wouldn't have. In the end, holding Grent hostage was the right thing. Ryuk hummed as he activated the Void Vortex skill before he jumped above the vortex, and he and Grent were instantly dragged into it, the blue portal soon closing up and the image returning to normal. The world seemed to halt for a few seconds before once more Ryuk felt the ground beneath his feet, but the second he did, the air on his hands rose up as he looked around him and found that the sky had been bloated. Bloated by the bodies of hundreds of aquatic men that absolutely hovered everywhere, sitting on gigantic sharks and with powerful tridents radiating blue energy in their grasps. His eyes scanned them as he saw them completely block off all of his route and any chance to run. They were all at the Cataclysm stage and the sharks they were riding were grade B level. But then Ryuk truly froze as he found a figure who wasn't riding on a shark. Instead, he was floating before the army, and surprisingly enough, he was a merman with bulging muscles, scars torn over his chest and shoulders, and a humanoid golden scythe in his hands. Silence reigned over the entire area as Ryuk exchanged gazes with the merman who held a fiery expression, as he slowly turned his trident's forked edge toward Ryuk. "This is as far as you reach, intruder." Ryuk turned to look at the merman and he noticed his cultivation. "Peak of the Cataclysm stage?" he mused to himself before exhaling loudly, the water before him freezing and then thawing as his eyes focused. "Here," he said as he flung out Grent's head towards the man, who reached for it and quickly passed it to another guard at the side, who rushed off into the distance with Grent's head. He truly let me live." Grent thought in shock and disbelief as the side of his eyes barely caught the sight of Ryuk's image, covered up by the cloud guards. He had thought his death was no doubt done. Ryuk would, without a doubt, kill him once they arrived in the Lati's kingdom. That was why he had telepathically called the soldiers together on their way, to make sure they would seek revenge for him. But here he was, being rushed off to care with some bit of life, just enough to make sure he survived the ordeal. In the end, he had proven to be a man of his words. But would that save him from his own death that he himself was about to face? "Listen to me, merman," Ryuk said as he addressed the fiery-looking merman directly. "I'm not here to cause any trouble. And what are you here to cause then? Murder and death?" The man shot back as Ryuk shook his head before he brought out his device. In the next instant, an holographic projection appeared in the water. The hologram projected some sort of map, with a single beaming red light and a green light that didn't seem all that far off from each other. "As you can see, I'm tracking down one of mine, the red dot, and as you all can see, she's somewhere in these waters. I only want to get her and take her back. That's all I want and why I'm here. If you'll allow me, we'll be able to stop the senseless murder, and I'll do what I came here to do and leave peacefully," Ryuk offered to them. While he could easily rip his scythe through them all, none of them were as strong as he was, and all it would take was a little time. He had placed himself in their shoes and was quick to learn that they didn't deserve their death, at least not from his hands. Right now, he might be here for Astralaxia, but really, he was intruding in their territory and therefore an invader. If he killed them, that would cement that fact, no matter what his goals were. If he could stop the senseless death with just a few words, then he felt no need to kill senselessly anymore. Porion looked at the young man before him, and even though his heart refused to give in, he felt a chill down his spine. Even though he seemed barely old enough to grow a beard, the boy before him radiated the aura of an early stage of the cataclysm. But what shocked him the most was the sense of danger that still filled his heart. Even though he was at the early cataclysm stage and he himself was at the peak, he still felt his own body quivering, telling him not to confront the figure before him. And the way he was calm, even though they completely surrounded him, the plea he had made wasn't one from fear at all. Instead, it was like a calm offer that he didn't mind if they refused. Mysterious. Too mysterious. Porion thought in his heart before his hands tightened, and in the next instant, he raised his trident and slammed the butt of it into the ground. Instantly, the mermen quickly regrouped themselves, as their formation surrounded Ryuk, not pointing at him, but facing his back instead. "I'll take you up on your offer, but on one condition. You will return with us to our guardian. Everyone, invader or visitor, must all pay a visit to the guardian," Porion said as Ryuk's eyes furrowed but then flashed in understanding. "If I've truly arrived in the aquatic race world, then finding Aster will be easier if I have some sort of guide. Whoever the guardian is, he must be pretty good with the area, and I doubt Aster is the one to stay quietly here. I should be able to get some answers and make my search easier." "Fine by me," Ryuk said with a helpless shrug as Porion nodded, and they both began their walk. Ryuk walked on both feet while the rest swam on their huge sharks, and Porion simply used his fishtail. Since they descended, they continued further and further until they arrived before a large gate that reached up as far as the eye could see, and as wide as the eye could see. Ryuk watched as the merman swarmed forward and then raised up his trident, tapping it on the gate on a random place before deep blue light flashed on its surface, and a gate was revealed. A small gate guarding a total of 3 pinholes in the middle. Porion dipped his trident's sharp fork into these holes, before twisting it up and down. Then, blue light emanated from his trident, swimming into the holes in the gate. A pulse of blue lights then swarmed forward from the point of contact, outwardly winding to the entirety of the gate as Porion took his trident off the hole of the gate. And then, the sound of heavy opening resounded as the gate slowly opened up, and Ryuk's eyes furrowed before he shut both of them closed when he felt an incredibly bright source of light, as if the sun had been opened up right in his face, causing him to snap both eyes shut. But it wasn't long before he opened them again, and his jaw dropped to the ground when he saw what was before him. The massive gate creaked open, releasing a low, echoing groan that rippled through the depths of the water like a slow, ancient breath awakening from slumber. A blinding light flooded out from within, so intense Ryuk instinctively shut both eyes tight. For a moment, it felt like the sun itself had descended into the sea and kissed his very face. But when he slowly opened them again, adjusting to the glow, his breath hitched. What lay before him shattered everything he thought he knew about the ocean's bottom. "A city?" he muttered aloud. "No, not just a city. The city, Lantis, is stretched on forever." Massive domes of glass shimmered with neon blue and violet hues, casting an ethereal glow across the water like the aurora borealis caught in a bubble. Towering spires of coral and obsidian danced in between the domes, their tops spiraling like helixes toward the ocean's surface, defying all logic of architecture. Schools of fish with crystal-like scales zipped by in synchronized formation, their trails lighting up briefly in streaks of blue. Giant manta rays, their wings carrying bioluminescent patterns, glided peacefully over wide roads paved with glistening sea stone. Mermen swam freely, some armored, some dressed in elegant robes that flowed like ink in water. Massive sharks swam lazily beside them, unbothered, docile, and most shocking of all, tamed. Behind them, humanoid figures with fish-like scales, but unlike the mermen, they moved without tails. Their bodies were lean, eyes glowing faintly with the familiar blue energy, their long hair drifting behind them like silk. "The Aquataris?" Porion said calmly beside him, noticing Ryuk's questioning eyes. "They're like us, but born of both sea and surface. They don't need tails to swim." "Oh," Ryuk replied, eyes flashing. "They were just like Grant." But then he noticed something peculiar. There were a lot more Aquataris with humanoid legs compared to the ones with fishtails. As they moved deeper into the city, Ryuk noticed intricate carvings etched into every wall and pillar. Scenes of battles, alliances, strange gods with kelp-like hair and finned crowns. His eye lingered on one in particular, a mural of a glowing figure with a red crystal heart standing atop the ruins of a sunken warship, arms raised as sea creatures bowed. "History?" Ryuk asked softly. "A prophecy," Porion answered, his tone unusually distant. Ryuk said nothing, simply taking in the detail, memorizing it. The roads curved in strange patterns. Some sloped upward into vertical tunnels of water that coiled like vines. Others dipped into glowing caverns where creatures he'd never imagined scurried about. Large circular hubs pulsed at intersections. Public portals, as Ryuk watched aquatic people beamed in and out like ripples vanishing in still water. Above them, floating islands of stone levitated by energy shone like tiny moons, housing elite towers or what looked like aquariums, gardens, and palaces. And at the center of it all, towering higher than anything else in sight, stood a colossal palace of silver, layered with translucent barriers and guarded by dozens of armored figures. Tridents crossed, eyes glowing beneath ornate helmets. Porion gestured toward it, his expression unreadable. "The Guardian resides there." Ryuk's eyes narrowed. "So, that's where we're going." And yet, despite the beauty, the lights, and the unspoken reverence of Lantis, he couldn't help but feel eyes on him. Watching, judging, waiting ever since he had stepped through the gate. Beneath the calm currents and radiant glow, there was tension, like a note held too long in a song about to break. But Ryuk showed nothing. He wasn't here to fight. He was here for her, Astralaxia. And if the city held even the faintest trace of her, he would find it, no matter how deep he had to go. They moved slowly, not because of fatigue, but because every eye in Atlantis had turned to watch them. Ryuk walked beside Porion through a great avenue of light. The path, paved with a gleaming substance that pulsed faintly beneath their feet like the beat of a living thing, stretched all the way to the colossal structure ahead. The Guardian's Hall. It loomed like a sleeping god at the heart of the city, its arched walls made of crystallized stone, its gates taller than any tower Ryuk had seen above or below the surface. Veins of glowing energy ran through it like a heartbeat, pulsing rhythmically, illuminating carved runes of an ancient language no human tongue could pronounce. But it wasn't the hall that made his steps careful. It was the people. Atlantis had slowed. Mermen halted mid-swim. The Aquataris stopped their silent gliding. Traders paused by their coral stalls. Guards shifted their stances, tridents drawn ever so slightly closer to their chests. Thousands of them watched him, some wide with awe, others narrowed with suspicion, a few with something colder, fear. "Why are they staring?" Ryuk whispered without looking at Porion. "You're human," Porion answered, keeping his gaze ahead. "It's not every day we get a human walking through the gates, especially one escorted by the gate soldiers." Porion replied, but in his heart, he felt compelled to add, "and walking on both feet instead of having been tied up with chains." As they walked, the water thickened, not literally but emotionally, like swimming through tension. Whispers slipped through the currents, too muffled to understand, but clear in tone. Caution, worry, rumors already being born. Ryuk said nothing. Porion, too, remained silent, until they finally arrived at the foot of the Guardian's Hall. Two massive armored figures stood before the gates, neither moving nor acknowledging them. They were built like mountains, eyes hidden behind masks, skin like smooth obsidian. Their tridents radiated power Ryuk could feel from here. Porion stopped. "This is as far as I go." Ryuk turned to him. "You're all not coming in?" "I wasn't summoned." "And I was." Porion offered a tight nod. Something inside that hall wants to meet you. Don't lie. Don't bluff. Speak your truth, or the hall itself might reject you. Ryuk glanced at the towering gates, then back at the watching people still frozen behind him. I wasn't planning on lying anyway. He stepped forward. The guards did not move, but the gates did. With a low hum, deeper than anything he'd heard underwater, they parted slowly, opening like the jaws of a beast ready to judge whether to devour or accept. Inside, a tunnel of glowing sapphire light stretched forward. Ryuk took one last breath and stepped through. The gates closed behind him. The whispers of Atlantis faded. Now only the voice of the deep remained. At first it was all dark, itching darkness where he couldn't even see his own hands. But then, the sound of faintly crackling lights rang in the distant space as he watched a blue flame bloom. It continued into the distance as the crystals in the wall began lighting up, stretching farther and farther into the distance, providing illumination, until they arrived before the end of the room, where stood a throne. A throne with a figure seated upon it, completely covered in unervingly long blue hair that hid all his features. His massive tail, 5 meters in length, wound around the throne. His back was tilted to the side of the seat, and stabbed into the floor beside him was a gigantic black trident that radiated a soulless aura. "Hello!" Ryuk called out to him, not moving an inch from where he was standing. His voice echoed through the walls, finally stirring the man awake. Ryuk watched him sit upright, the sound of bone cracking like lightning. The man eventually rose, and Ryuk's eyes flashed as he watched the figure slowly lift his face. And unconsciously, a gasp left Ryuk's lips as he looked at the man, stepping 2 paces backward until his back slammed against the door behind him. If there was ever a word to describe horror, it would still fail to capture the image before him. A man riddled completely in scars. One eye had been brutally ripped apart, replaced by 3 jagged claw marks, and all over his face were cracks glowing with blue light. When Ryuk looked below his face and down to his body, his heart pounded faster. He saw those same devastating cracks barely containing the blue energy within him, energy that seemed desperate to explode outward. Ryuk tried to speak, but instead steeled his heart and walked toward the man. For Ryuk could sense something from those cracks, a familiar aura. In the next instant, he ordered silently in his mind, and a vial soon appeared in his hand. He appeared before the merman, stretching out his hand. "I don't know what afflicts you or how you came to be like this, but I can sense your life waning away, bit by bit. Take this, and maybe you can rise back to your feet once more," he said as he stretched out the blue vial in his hands. The system had been able to analyze the cause of the man's breakdown and had offered Ryuk a cure already. He could sense that the merman was covered in cracks, unable even to stand on his own feet. What harm could he do to him? The merman looked at the vial before him with piercing left blue eyes before turning it back to Ryuk, his gaze flashing. He could feel the bizarre energy in his body reacting wildly, trying to escape whatever was in the vial. A sign that maybe, just maybe, it could save him. "Don't!" The man's thick voice barely echoed through the world as he spoke. "Waste it on me. Give it to my queen instead," he finished, and Ryuk watched as blue liquid seeped out from his eyes and nose. The little life left in him was fading fast, and seeing the man's unwavering eyes that wouldn't bend, Ryuk made his move. He appeared before him, gripping the man's neck with his hands and halting him in place. Then, lifting his head, he opened his jaw with a finger and poured the contents of the vial into his throat before stepping away from him. The man fell to his hands as his body and bones began crackling, flaking apart like a broken holographic. An inhuman grunt filled the throne room. Ryuk watched with furrowed brows as the blue energy that seeped out from the cracks in the man's body began rapidly rising into the air, as if being forced out of him. The merman writhed madly, his hand tearing fresh cracks into the ground beneath, but as the blue energy left his body, the cracks quickly began sealing themselves. The blue energy vanished, and the light gathered into a ball, trying to escape through the roof. But then, a battle cry escaped the lips of the merman as his hand reached for his massive dark trident. A powerful blue wave of energy burst out furiously from its depths, covering its underside, and then, boom! The ground cracked into nothing as the merman surged into the air, above the blue energy, slamming down with his strike. It was as if the entire ocean was placed under that single swing of his. A powerful shockwave whirled toward Ryuk, his feet skidding across the ground uncontrollably, yet his eyes remained pressed on the scene before him. He watched the strike cleave through the blue ball of energy, which soon turned dark before it exploded into nothing, its remnants fading into the wind. A mini ripple spread as the man slowly swam down to the ground, his eyes gazing at Ryuk, whose brows furrowed deeply when he finally saw the power level this man was at. He couldn't help but click his tongue. Tisage, a pseudo-eternal stage. The merman was at his power level, and now Ryuk had awakened him. Ryuk prepared himself for a fight, but then the merman's next actions surprised him. He bowed his head and said, "Thank you, but I'm afraid I must go to my queen's side as we speak. The monster is on its way to her right now," the merman said, swinging his gigantic trident to the side and ripping open a portal before walking toward it. The monster? Ryuk wondered, remembering the familiar blue energy he had sensed in the man's wound previously, before he instantly made his choice. "I'll come with you," he said, walking with conviction toward the merman, whose eyes furrowed as he turned his back to him. "If the monster reduced you to such a state, then running back for a second round doesn't guarantee your victory. But what if you have me by your side? Your chances increase, won't they?" "Why? What do you seek? What are you even?" The words rang out from a place that, at one sight, one could see ought to be mighty. High walls, a wide expanse with a glowing blue gem floor, a roof that seemed unending. It was all characteristic of a place grand and mighty, except now it had been broken down to ruin. The long pillars were littered in cracks, some having fallen already. The blue gemmed floor had been shattered into nothing, some places having unending abysses, still radiating a faint aura of destruction that had come upon them. On some parts of the ground were the bodies of mermans, badly bitten and covered in cracks, their huge tridents shattered into pieces until they formed a small mountain of garbage. But there was one peculiar thing about them that one could see. It was that they were all alive. They were deeply injured, but alive. And remaining standing in what was supposed to be a majestic throne room were two people. One of them was a mermaid wearing a crown, with her extraordinarily long tail that reached 7 meters coiled around the throne where she sat. On her face and neck were cracks, as if something had thrust into it forcefully, and beneath these cracks one could see the same blue runic lines that covered the guardian. Her breaths were labored, barely audible, as she seemed to struggle to hold onto the life that was slowly seeping out of her body. But even then, her gaze remained on the figure standing before her. A lady of extraordinary beauty, donning a long blue robe covered in runic lines, her strong blue aura trailing behind her, with eyes of blue staring at the throne. On her robes, blue light danced around it, revealing it was no ordinary artifact, and her eyes were as calm as the surface of a lake, unbothered by the destruction around her, as if she was beyond them all. Even the pain etched on the mermaid queen's face didn't bring the littlest of creases to her own. "You invaded, but didn't fight the civilians. Instead, you came for me. You defeated my guardian, but didn't kill him. You could have killed my guards, but you spared their lives. Yet you caused so much destruction. Why? Why are you doing this? What are you? When did our aquatic race earn your irk?" The mermaid queen asked the lady, whose eyes remained unperturbed as she looked at the cracks on the side of her face and her neck, the only thing that seemed to keep her attention. "Earn my irk? Your people don't matter to me. I need some bit of energy, and only you and that guardian of yours seem to have enough to interest me. Hence why I'm here," she answered, unruffled. As the mermaid queen bit her lips in anger, when she remembered him, her guardian, who had fought the intruder with everything he had, yet had lost in the end. The only thing that kept her going was that she knew he at least wasn't dead yet. The mysterious being before them didn't kill, only injuries for some unknown reason. Her choices were thinning, and she was starting to wonder if she would need to use the secret card to take down this lady before her. And talking of your guardian, he really is one hell of a foe, the lady said as she slowly turned her head into the distance. She could feel it, the mighty aura that was rapidly approaching her with fervor and power. I've lost connection to my energy. That must mean he had found a way to repress it. How though? She wondered as the mermaid's queen's sunken eyes flashed when she could finally pick up the aura. A massive aura that thundered forward, spreading like the sea and rapidly approaching them. The entire ground shook heavily as a tail landed down onto the floor, lifting the entire structure from the force, and then the dust soon settled as the figures were revealed. None other than a merman, with a stature bulging with unbelievable might. His humongous trident glinted with powerful blue light that seemed to draw the light of the entire world into it. You! Osirios growled in anger as he looked at the destruction before him. The mighty palace had fallen, its guards littering the cracks, and now the queen had been held captive in her throne. All the handiwork of this monster in human skin before her. You will pay for your act. Osirios roared out as his trident pinned forward, the ground beneath him shuddering from power, and he was about to shoot out when the voice rang out. Wait! It couldn't be any simpler than that, yet the entire wave and billowing energy faded into nothing, as the world was seemingly held in a state of silence, as if sound was refusing to move in the face of this command. Osirios felt his hatred and anger calming down from the words, as he stopped himself at the last second. And even the lady, whose eyes held no emotion at Osirios' reappearance, had her eyes shaking in slight shock upon hearing the voice. Is that? She wondered in her head, and finally, Osirios turned to the side, giving way to the sight of an unnoticeable figure, a young man with snowy white hair. Ryuk? The lady called out in shock on sighting him. And for truly, she was none other than Astralaxia. The sound of footsteps rang out as Ryuk calmly walked forward, soon appearing before Astralaxia, who had a smirk appear on her lips. But then, she watched as Ryuk walked by her side and continued forward. As she turned her head, she found him standing before the mermaid queen, whose eyes furrowed at the sight of the human boy. Here, Ryuk called out as the queen looked at the blue vial in his hands. This will heal you up, like it healed your guardian. He said to her, as the queen looked at the guardian, whose body had clearly been healed from the afflicting energy induced into them by the lady. And seeing him giving no objection, she took the vial and downed its contents, her body wriggling and spinning from pain, before the blue energy in her was washed outside, and Ryuk watched with clear eyes as the blue energy slowly floated back to Astralaxia, dispersing into her. Seemed like she was absorbing the life essence or soul power of the guardian and the queen, the two people who just seemed to have the highest amount of it. The system analyzed as Ryuk's eyebrows furrowed. But I gave her an order with the contract grimoire to not kill anyone. Has she been able to override that? He thought in confusion before the notification appeared. No, the contract grimoire is in effect. It's just that your order was not to kill anyone, which she didn't. She hurt them instead of killing them, therefore allowing her to not be punished by it. Seems like I'm the one that should have framed it better. Ryuk mused to himself as he rose upright from the queen, whose injuries had healed, picked up from the ground by the muscular guardian. Rest assured, this won't happen anymore. He consoled before he rose up, and in the next instant, a gigantic dark vortex opened before them as he slowly stepped in, before turning his gaze to the side. Come with me, Astralaxia. TCH, you can't order me around, kid, Aster said with a scoff, but then Ryuk compelled. By the order of the contract grimoire. Arga? A groan of pain left Aster's lips as her hand suddenly reached for her head in pain. Her eyes coated in red veins, making her resemble a demon. Her teeth gnashed together as Ryuk watched her try to fight back against the sudden force. But in the end, He watched as she soon quieted down and rose up with a neutral expression before she entered the portal first, disappearing within. "My apologies," Ryuk said with a wave to the Guardian and the Queen, who were looking at him as if he was a ghost, before he also stepped in and disappeared into the portal. "Tell me, Osiris, what do you think the power level of that lady is?" The Queen asked as Osiris looked at the disappearing vortex, his eyes flashing. "The same stage as me, my queen, the pseudo-eternal stage. But her battle arts and techniques are beyond anything I have ever seen. She wielded primordial rules in every one of her moves, something only an eternal stage should be able to do. In fact, my lord, it won't be wrong to refer to her as an eternal stage expert." Osiris replied as the Queen's eyes narrowed even more. "A lady seemingly at the eternal stage, under the control of a human boy." She mused under her breath as her head flashed with memories, finding the situation quite familiar. Suddenly, her eyes widened in shock as it hit her. Could it be him? When Ryuk stepped through the portal, the world faintly paused as he felt himself sliding through a space wormhole. Then, he felt his legs solidifying and found himself before the surface of a large ocean. Turning his head to the side was none other than Astralaxia, who didn't have quite the satisfactory expression on her face yet was also filled with confusion. One question was raging through Aster's mind. How? Just how had he been able to track me down? And so fast, I didn't even know he was onto me already. TCH, if I had just absorbed that, I could have just reached the eternity stage and broken away from his control already. TCH, I was so close, Aster thought in her mind, seemingly lost in her train of thought but was awakened from the sound. Ahem. You. How did you even find me? The same way you put a tracker on me and lied that it was a communication tool? He replied, as Aster's eyes flashed before she grinned evilly. Seems like you're pretty smarter than you look. Trust me, I am, Ryuk said, before his eyebrows furrowed at her forehead, and he continued, seems like you've been a bit busy. You were barely at the Cataclysm stage the last time I saw you, and now you're close to the Eternal stage. Going around, absorbing people's soul essence. You've been doing more than just a simple walk, Astralaxia. Ryuk mused as he noticed her cultivation. Right now, her aura was stably on the pseudo-eternal stage, and he could even feel that faint aura around her. The aura he had only seen around that frost wyvern lady and the half-fallen one. The aura of eternity. It was clear that right now, she was infinitely close to the eternity stage herself. Seems like I came at the right time. Who knew if she would have broken through the contract grimoire once she reached the eternity stage? Things may have gotten quite dangerous, Ryuk thought to himself. You're surprisingly not as mad as I thought you would be, though, Astralaxia said, looking at Ryuk's expression with a raised eyebrow. She had kind of expected him to flip out because of her actions, but he didn't even seem that much bothered at all. His expression was as neutral as ever. Come with me, Aster. We have a little catching up to do, Ryuk said as he resumed his walk into the distance, and Aster could only click her tongue. Now that Ryuk had used the contract grimoire to force her into walking around with him, she couldn't refuse his order of walking by his side. But then, she watched as Ryuk stopped in his tracks with troubled eyes. Where do I even go? He thought to himself. He had no house and had no academy to go to. Seriously, I need to get a house of my own. I can't be living territory-less like this. Ryuk thought to himself with furrowed eyebrows. Perhaps it's time I get a job and get some life too. A house, a car, somewhere safe and secret. He mused to himself, but then heaved a sigh as he brought out his device. I'll do that after I get the leader's deal settled. For now, I'll need to rely on Mad White. Ryuk mused to himself as he picked up Mad White's number from the array of memories in his head and quickly input it into the device before he dialed it. Fine by me. I'll be there soon. Ryuk replied to the phone before switching off the device and slipping it into his pocket. Whatever is happening, I just hope I'm not a part of it, Aster asked with puzzled eyes as Ryuk turned to look at her. It's actually all about you. Huh? 20 minutes later. Sounds like you all could really benefit from learning about the nulls. In a way, it's like your survival even depends on it. The words echoed in the air where there were none other than Ryuk and Astralaxia, who walked through the sky as they continued moving invisibly, yet with incredible speed. Seems like you're understanding, at least, Ryuk said with a smile. He had thought he would have to go through a world of convincing, but she had accepted far easier than he thought. But, she suddenly called out as Ryuk turned to her. Why should I even bother at all? Huh. I don't care about this world, remember? It can get invaded and overtaken for all I care. It's not my world, and once I reach the eternity stage, I'm planning on leaving, Aster said as Ryuk raised an eyebrow. Well, you should bother because I care about it. And you're indirectly placed under my rule, remember? I can just force it on you, Ryuk said with a shrug as Astralaxia scoffed. You do know the amount of time you can order me around is limited, right? Astralaxia said, as Ryuk shrugged. You know, I try to take things nice with you, Aster. I really do. But when I place an order not to kill and you go ahead and start hurting people, then you're leaving me not much choice. That just shows I was right in being wary of you. I show you a point of importance, but you said you're not interested. Telling me you don't mind if millions of children, women, and men die. That shows how heartless you are. And once more I'm forced to impose another strict command on you. Little by little, you're turning from that expert I respected, because of her contribution to my growth, to a creature that needs more chains around her neck, Ryuk said, this time with a serious expression as Aster's eyes furrowed. TCH, as if you don't enjoy it. She replied with a scoff but was shocked by Ryuk's next words. Once the End Earth is safe and we win the battle with the Nulls, I'll destroy the contract grimoire. You'll be free. Really? What? Then you can go to whatever world you want, or wherever it is you come from. Why? Aster asked with dubious eyes. I also reasoned that if I was trapped in a realm for countless years only to awaken once more, I wouldn't want to be stuck under the control of another person for the entirety of my life. I figured that out. Your desire to escape your own contract grimoire makes sense. No one wants to be treated like a slave or be under the whims and orders of another, especially forcefully. But, instead of it being a race of you growing stronger and trying to break free, giving me headaches and me placing more chains on you, I figured out that we can cooperate instead. In what way? Astralaxia replied unconvinced. Help us win this null war, Aster. And when that is done, I'll give you your freedom. If you agree, you won't have many chains on your neck, and you won't be forced around. I'll also gain a good helper for my goals, and in the end, you'll get your freedom. But if you don't agree, then it'll just be an empty race, and who knows how far you'll push my anger, so much that one day I might just order you to be destroyed by the contract grimoire. Ryuk stated as Aster rolled her eyes. You can't do that. It's not part of the rules. But there are countless ways to make someone regret something. Isn't there? Especially if they'll have no choice but to agree. Death isn't the only worst punishment, Ryuk said with an unreadable gaze as Aster's eyes flashed. When she tried to put herself in Ryuk's shoes, she knew well that there were truly countless ways she could suffer badly. Ways the contract grimoire would accept. Promises are just words in the end. You can wake up tomorrow morning and not feel the same. I would have just worked for nothing, Aster said, not falling for the trap. Even if she agreed to the idea, it wasn't cemented in the contract grimoire. Ryuk could wake up after the world was in peace and say he didn't feel like it anymore and still keep her under his control. All her effort then would have been for nothing. Let's make a second deal then, Ryuk said as he stopped, with Aster also sliding to a stop. The contract grimoire can only take a single deal, she replied. But then her eyes widened in shock when a golden light flashed in Ryuk's hands and a page appeared before her. You have a second contract grimoire. By the order of the contract grimoire. If you, Aster, stand by the side of I, Ryuk, and you help me in all the ways you can to make sure End Earth wins this war, then I promise, by the order of the contract grimoire, to free you from all contract grimoire orders that I have placed you under. Ryuk stated as Astralaxia's eyes flashed in disbelief. Her words stuck in her throat, but then she steeled her mind as she replied. If you refuse, then I will be the one to be stuck under your whims. Ryuk replied. For all eternity? Aster pressed on. For all eternity. But only if we win the war against the Null and prevent Endearth from becoming a dark Gomer. Ryuk said as he bit his finger, and a single drop of his blood floated upward, soon appearing before the page, and it assimilated into it as a golden sparkle flashed through the clouds. Aster watched the page slowly float toward her. So what do you say, Aster? Do you dare risk it? Do you believe in your heart that we can win this war against the Null? And can you risk it all for that belief of yours, or refuse, and be stuck under my control, possibly until eternity too? The question hit Astralaxia like a high-speeding train, as she stared at Ryuk in disbelief. Aster's plan had been simple. One she had carefully crafted from the second she had been trapped in her realm. To devise a portal to random worlds that would allow them to gain access to her realm and help defeat the pawn that was used to trap her. Once that was done, she would be freed, and then she would follow whoever freed her and escape to his or her world, freeing herself eternally. Ryuk had done everything, and now she had been able to reach Endearth. But her plan didn't just end there. This planet was a wild world. It was unlike her real world, and she had already sketched a plan to return. That plan was to widen the disparity between her and Ryuk's strength, hence rendering the contract grimoire ineffective. She had planned that by going around Endearth and absorbing the soul power of high-ranked individuals to improve her own strength, using the absence of the hurt clause in the contract to her advantage. She had also placed a tracker on Ryuk so she would be alerted when he was close to her, and she could move away from him, all until she reached the Eternity stage. Once she reached the Eternity stage, the strength disparity between her and Ryuk would be too wide, and the contract would naturally be broken. But less than a few minutes, and all her plans had gone distraught. For one, Ryuk had been able to track her down. Secondly, he had a cure that could remove her ability of Soul Devour from others, successfully nullifying her siphoning and stopping her cultivation ascension. And to top it all off, he had also reached the Cataclysm stage. Astralaxia already knew what Ryuk was capable of. When he was only at the Dominion stage, he had been able to complete the quest, which she knew well would need the power level of the Cataclysm stage. He was already capable of the Cataclysm stage of power at just the Dominion stage. Now that he was at the Cataclysm stage, she wouldn't fool herself into thinking he was still only as strong as a Cataclysm expert. Right now, the young man before her should be at least at the pseudo-eternal stage. Even if she reached the Eternity stage right now, the contract wouldn't be broken, because the disparity of strength is no longer wide. That had ruined her plan, and she had eventually come to accept her fate. But of course, a new plan was already brewing in her mind to escape his control. But how could she have expected this offer? The offer for her to regain her freedom after his world escaped the wars of the Null. But the question was, could she agree to it? This type of wild world facing the Nulls and winning? It's difficult, very difficult. Astralaxia thought with furrowed eyebrows. She had never considered the Null at all ever since she had arrived, because she was confident she would be leaving soon anyway. But now, if she was to consider his deal, then she must be well aware of how they would fare against the Nulls. It will be difficult for them to escape their fate, Aster muttered. She knew well the horrors of the Null, and she had more than once come across many worlds which all had succumbed to the might of the Nulls. There were a few strong experts in this world, something she had found out during the small time she had spent here. But the Nulls? The least thing they were lacking in were strong experts. It was a tough choice, as she would still be trapped if this world ended up losing to the Nulls. But then Aster's eyes flashed. It might be impossible for a wild world on this level to fight against the Nulls and prevent their fate from being turned to a dark Gomer. But they're not hopeless. I'll take the risk, she thought, as Ryuk silently watched Aster's eyeballs rolling here and there. And in the next instant, she bit her hand and swerved it forward, sending splashes of her blood flying toward the contract grimoire. Quickly enough, it landed into it, dispersing into it. In the next instant, The contract grimoire flashed with a powerful golden light before it faded into the empty space, to a place even Ryuk couldn't sense. "You agreed to the deal?" Ryuk asked in surprise as he looked at Aster's serious gaze. But then his shock faded, followed by a brilliant light that shined through his eyes as he unconsciously turned his gaze into the space. "Seems like we're not so hopeless after all," he muttered, his words barely picked up by Aster. "Seems like you didn't have much hope yourself?" Aster said, as Ryuk nodded his head. "I was hopeful at least, but I'm never the hope type of person. I never loved hope. The null being stronger than recorded is scary. That was why I requested the deal to you. You know about the null and their power. If even you yourself refuse the deal, then that means we're truly completely hopeless, since you'd rather risk being under my control than believing that we will succeed in defeating the nulls. That would have destroyed any hope I have left in me. But you agreed. That means there's a clear hope," Ryuk stated as Aster shrugged her shoulders. "I won't say there's a clear hope. I would just say I know a way," she replied, as she continued into the distance and Ryuk followed after her. "Good. You just need to show that plan to the 10 leaders. They would be a major help," Ryuk stated as they continued into the distance before he came to a stop, as his gaze looked downwards where he could see the top of the large mansion. Bringing out his device, he was about to dial up Mad White when, "You're finally here." Mad White's voice resounded as they both turned their gaze behind them and watched as a vortex opened up and Mad White stepped out with a grin on his face. "Welcome back, Ryuk." "Mad White. Ha ha ha." A boisterous laughter rang atop the castle as Mad White walked toward Ryuk, his hands slapping down toward his shoulder as he wiggled Ryuk like a worm. "Good to see you once again. And never disappear off like that next time," he followed up, as Ryuk scratched the back of his head helplessly. "Hopefully, I never get into such a situation again. Still, that was more sore than brave. I eventually heard from the Naga Queen that you were doing well, though in slumber. That managed to cool off the armies a bit," Mad White said as Ryuk chuckled before his eyebrows furrowed. "The armies?" he asked, confused. "Yes, you're humanity's new hero now. At least to those who know, and the human soldiers do. You've saved them twice now. They're greatly indebted to you and had already begun organizing a search party before the news came from the Nagas, managing to cool off the steam," Mad White explained to Ryuk, whose face softened, and he nodded. "And if I may guess, you're the eternal expert from the trial. Good to finally see you in person," Mad White added, turning his attention to Astralaxia, who had her eyes narrowed at him before her lips moved. "Good to see you too, especially since it's not every day one sees a genetically modified individual," Aster replied, as Mad White's jaw nearly dropped to the ground. "She can see through the genetic makeover of my being?" he thought in shock before he regained himself, laughing out boisterously again and grabbing Ryuk's shoulder as they descended downward. "Come down, Ryuk. Be my guest," Mad White cajoled as they both disappeared into the mansion below, the skies beginning to clear since. But it had been barely 30 seconds since they all disappeared into the Masnian when a dark vortex soon appeared in the sky, and a figure soon stepped out. A figure of pitch-dark skin, with 2 humongous pitch-black wings, the same for his pitch-dark eyes. His eyes looked toward the place where Mad White, Ryuk, and Astralaxia had disappeared, before his hand raised up and from the tip of his razor-sharp claws, golden strands of aura began leaking out. They gathered tightly and formed the image of an individual clothed in a golden veil. "Just like you guessed, my lady, he has come to his mentor's house, and he truly has the Eternity Stage expert by his side," the pitch-black fallen man said to the holographic image. "Keep watching," was the order that was given, as the holographic image slowly closed up and the pitch-dark fallen narrowed his eyes at the mansion before the golden portal opened behind him and he stepped into it, disappearing from the place. "I could guess you would be in a hurry to get down to business once you arrived here," Mad White stated to Ryuk beside him as they appeared in the pitch-white hall that bore nothing but an endless white plain. Within were just the 3 of them, Mad White, Ryuk, and Astralaxia herself. But with a simple clap, The entire room began to change as the ground gave way, and a total of 11 small devices, the size of a pin, appeared in the air. Soon, they began flaring a blue light as they rotated in the air, making way for a holographic projection. Quickly, a total of 10 screens were in the sky, and then Mad White clapped once more as a total of 3 chairs appeared in the place, spaced about a meter apart from each other. These are pin holograph communicators. They will display the image of the 10 leaders in real time, canceling the need for them to appear in person. And this entire room itself is a pin holographic communicator that will automatically display our image to them. You just need to take the seat to activate. The 10 leaders should receive the connection. After all, they must have all been dying of impatience, Mad White said with a grin as Aster took the middle seat facing all the 10 holographs, and slightly behind her were the 2 other seats which Ryuk and Mad White took. Just as Ryuk said, it had been barely 30 seconds when the first holographic screen settled and a new figure appeared. And surprisingly enough, it was the figure Ryuk least expected to arrive early for the meeting. The picture of the Titan leader, Borin. "Took you long enough, you bastard," the Titan leader rushed to say once his image appeared in the room. Aster raised an eyebrow, and Ryuk could only roll his eyes as Mad White grinned, and replied, "Of all bastards I expected to appear first, I have to say, you were the least one I was expecting. What's wrong, you old bastard? Can't hold onto your shit for any longer," Mad White said with an unyielding tone as the Titan leader scoffed coldly, and was about to reply when, "Can we have a good, civilized meeting between men for the devil's sake, Borin?" The one who talked was the grizzled old dwarf leader as Borin clicked his tongue in dissatisfaction before settling down on his seat, refusing to say more. One by one, the holographic images began appearing, and soon a total of 10 leaders were clearly in the room. Surprising to Ryuk was that apart from the 10 families, another holographic image soon appeared, and this time it was actually a human. A dark-haired muscular man with scars around some sides of his face, dressed in a dark suit, with a relaxed smile on his face. He raised his hand to Mad White and Ryuk, who nodded as they also raised their hands, returning the acknowledgement sign. That's humanity's divine commander, the highest level of a commander on Endearth. He has recently been awakened from slumber, Mad White whispered to Ryuk, whose eyes flashed as he stared at the man who looked at him intently before nodding, and Ryuk nodded back. It was the first time he had seen a powerful individual from the human race. Even though he was holographic, he could tell the man wasn't to be taken lightly. "Seems like we're all gathered here." A feminine voice came from one of the 10. The elf leader said with a solemn return echoing into the room. "I believe the meeting can start now, and I'll begin with the introduction for the new presence before us. Endearth is a vast world filled with various races. A total of 64 different races have been recorded up until now. And from the 64, a total of 10 have been chosen to be responsible for their care and survival." The dwarf leader began, looking at Astralaxia, whose eyes seemed to focus on his image. "Those 10 are regarded as the 10 hegemony families, and we sitting before you are the 10 leaders from each family. I am the dwarves' family leader, Elias Dwarford. Beside me is the Titan family leader, Borin Giantkin," the man said, pointing to the red-haired Titan who nodded. "And then the werewolf leader Alpha Kale, the aquatic leader Nathralus Aqua, the elf leader Lyra Waterbeam, the fallen leader Lucian Dominaire, the vampiro leader Arya Bloodborne, the avian race's leader Freya Rock, the Naga's leader Saphira Serpent, and last but not least, the Shadow Walker leader Noctis Walker," the dwarf leader said, introducing every single one of the leaders, who each gave a nod to which Aster replied with a nod of hers. But then there was the last holograph. "While we, the 10 families, exist, we have figured out the best way we could ever really work together to achieve our goal was by coming together under another group that will be created just for the correlation of the 10 families together. This group is known as the Ascension Group, responsible for the creation of the largest academy in the world, the Ascension Academy, a major power responsible for the balance of Endearth. They have sent one of their high-ranking representatives, and perhaps the most powerful of the human race, Sir Azrakan Drevenox, the divine commander of the human race and one of the three most high-ranking officials of the Ascension Group, the dwarf leader introduced, as a humble chuckle left the lips of Sir Azrakan. "Oh please, Elias, I'm just an old man with very good luck. Don't go too heavy with the praises," the man said as he waved his hands at Aster, who nodded in return. But Ryuk's eyes flashed, because for once in his life, he was able to see a human being that the 10 family leaders seemed to respect. During his last meeting, he had been there and had noticed how the 10 families talked about the humans. It wasn't with respect, only disdain. But looking at them now, each of the 10 family leaders didn't hold even the slightest amount of displeasure on the man's presence. Even though one could say Elias had overintroduced the man, at least more than the other 10 family leaders. Yet none of them seemed to have been offended by this fact. Even Borin, the Titan leader who was known as humanity's #1 biggest hater, simply held a neutral expression on his face. Not in support of the man, but not in hate either. He simply refused to show any emotion. It was the first time Ryuk had seen them have so much respect towards the humans whom they had always disdained. I wonder how he was able to achieve that, he mused to himself as he looked at the man. But then, it seemed the introductions had to continue, starting from Astralaxia. Normally, Ryuk would have tried to introduce Aster to them, but this time he decided not to. The 10 family leaders had introduced themselves. It was only right if they also introduced themselves by their own hands. And with Aster sitting down in the front, it was her turn. "I am Astralaxia, a soul from the undying galaxy of Etheron," Aster introduced calmly. Yet the eyes of the leaders furrowed as they scanned their memories but couldn't find anything at all. But from the name of the world, it was at least clear she wasn't from this universe. Neither was she close. "I am Malric Drevenox, also known as Mad White," Mad White introduced, as Ryuk's eyes flashed. It was the first time he had heard of Mad White's true name, but then his eyes narrowed at the surname. "Why does it? My son too." The words, followed by a boisterous laughter, rang out from none other than the divine commander. Not only Ryuk, but the eyes of the 10 family leaders bulged in shock. He's your son?" They screamed out in shock, and even Ryuk felt his heart almost tear out from his ribs. Mad White was the son of humanity's only divine commander, the son of the strongest human? All of the 10 family leaders couldn't help but swallow. Countless times they had almost killed Mad White. Locked him up, burnt him, imprisoned him up for days, locked up all that were related to him, to stop them from interfering with their operations. But all this time they had been trying to get rid of the son of the strongest human in the world. But what was even more bizarre was, never had Mad White ever tried to use that name to bail himself out. He had gotten through history and fate-shattering situations, yet never made mention of the name. A name that could very well save him from 99% of troubles if he had simply made it clear. In the end, they could only swallow in their lungs. Thank God he was still sitting. If he had been dead, who knows what hell would have broken through already. Sir Azrakan only chuckled, and Mad White's silence was enough for an answer. As the shock soon dispersed, everyone turned their attention to Ryuk's seat. "I'm his first and only personal intern," Ryuk said as he pointed sideways at Mad White, resulting in an eye roll from everybody in the room, while Sir Azrakan only chuckled. It was a short and shameless introduction, but then, it at least gave them the image and filled all they needed to know about him in this situation. As you might have already been told, our world, Endearth, is in endangerment from an alien group known as the Nulls. The dwarf leader decided to get into the major issue when Aster raised her hand up, automatically silencing him, and then she turned her gaze to look at every one of the holographs before her before she followed with a mind-boggling question. "Can you explain to me what you mean by aliens? Because all 10 of you are looking like aliens to me." Aster's words were as calm as ever, yet what followed after them was absolute silence as the 10 family leaders looked at her dumbly. Some, like Borin, with furrowed eyes instead. "Ah, of course, since you're not of this world. We all might look like aliens, but I assure you," the dwarf leader tried to say, but he was stopped by the Titan family leader, Borin, who raised his hand, ensuring silence before he turned to look at Aster with a furrowed gaze. You said 10 of us look like aliens before you. You heard well. Well then, might I ask who is the one among these 10 holographs who is not an alien? Boren asked, as Aster calmly turned her gaze to Sir Azrakan. He, along with his son behind me, they're the only 2 who aren't aliens to me. Everyone else in the room, apart from these 2, are aliens to this world, Astralaxia said, shocking the 10 family leaders speechless. Even Ryuk and Mad White had their eyebrows furrowed. When I came into this world, the first race I was fortunate enough to see were the Nulls. He confronted them, and I could sense they were invaders, as their energy wasn't of the source energy of this planet. But then, I decided to go for a walk around this world, separating from him, and as I walked, I began to notice something peculiar. None of the people I came across possessed the same aura as the source energy of this planet. Everyone radiated a different source energy, and only a single race radiated the same source energy as this world. A race I eventually came to know is referred to as humans. In short, apart from the human race, all other races radiated different source energy from the source energy of this world, which might just mean you all have no distinction from the Nulls I first came into contact with. Are you trying to say we're like the Nulls to you? The Titan leader asked, as Aster shook her head, bringing a smirk to the Titan leader's face. Seems like even she can crumble to the pressure of us, the Titan family. I am saying you all are exactly like the Nulls, she corrected, as the Titan leader's jaw hung low. So, I really need to understand what you mean by aliens. Since you all don't even radiate the same source energy as this world, it means you don't belong here, just as the Nulls don't belong here. So instead of bringing me the alien wording, perhaps you might want to start with the distinction between you all and the Nulls themselves. You are aliens, so what makes you a different alien from the Nulls? Now that would be a discussion I would want to be part of, Aster said, as the 10 leaders furrowed their brows. This time, their eyes shined with understanding as they realized what she meant. Alas, it was a truth difficult to say, but still, the dwarven leader spoke out. I understand where you're coming from now, Lady Astralaxia. Your distinction of aliens was because to you we, same as the Nulls, do not radiate the same aura as the source energy of the planet. That is because we, of the 10 families, along with the other races in this world, do not truly originate from this planet. We were all brought here one day, forcefully dragged away from our true world by a sky-splitting event that appeared on top of our original world. We were separated away from our original world, and when we opened our eyes, we found ourselves on this new world, the dwarven leader explained, a truth that caught Aster's eyes. But years have passed, and we have come to settle with the humans, who are the original inhabitants, and have been accepted by them, making us one of them and one with this world. Unlike the Nulls, who are here to reduce everyone else to nothing, we have made peace with the inhabitants of this world and learned to coexist with them, Elia said, resulting in an eye-roll from Mad White. That is the distinction between us and the Nulls, Elias explained, as Aster nodded with curious eyes before she raised up her hand, and Elias nodded. Does you or anyone else know how, or who, threw you out of your world and sent you here instead? She asked. Another mind-boggling question that sent silence across the room. But Elias took a breath and responded. I am afraid we do not have any recollection, except that the event had been consistent for all races that were sent here. A part of the sky of our original world fractured, and from the cracks, those closest to it were sent flying into the collapsing void. When we opened our eyes, we all found ourselves here on Endearth. We believe this is a normal worldwide phenomenon, as it didn't happen to only our race but to 63 races altogether. It can only have been a worldwide event, Elia said, as Aster raised her hand up once more, bringing silence. If it was a worldwide event, then why weren't the humans, the original inhabitants, sent away from their world to yours or to another race's world? Has the human race recorded such a happening? Aster asked, turning to Sir Azrakan, who shook his head calmly. That has never been recorded before, Lady Astralaxia. Then the truth is clear. This was no worldwide event or unexplainable phenomenon. This is a being-induced event, Aster said validly, as Elia's eyebrows shook. The what event? He couldn't help but ask once more. The ability to transfer an inhabitant of one world into another is a common ability bestowed to those who have reached the God King level of cultivation. So what happened to you all? Since it happened to all of you at the same time, it means a being at God King level or higher had sent you all here to end Earth, she said as pin-drop silence followed the room, with the leaders all staring at her with eyes full of disbelief. You all never knew? Aster asked, with the same disbelieving expression they were looking at her with before rolling off her eyes. Oh, of course, this is a lower world. The highest cultivation is the eternity stage, isn't it? There can't be a thing called the God King stage after all. Aster said, giving a side-eye glance to Ryuk, who closed his lips and reclined on his seat in defeat. The words brought not only disbelief but shock to everyone in the room. Some of them knew well in their hearts that whatever happened was definitely no simple event, but as time passed, they had naturally accepted it to be a worldwide event that didn't affect only them. The thought of it being the handiwork of a person had crossed their minds, but they were also aware it was impossible for any being to be capable of such a thing, so they had written it off as a natural phenomenon. But who would have expected that the last choice they had believed was actually the one most likely to be true? In the end, a being had been responsible, one with a cultivation that they had never even heard of but no doubt far beyond their greatest known peak. If I may guess, the null appeared not long after you guys were sent here, right? She followed up as the dwarven leader's eyes narrowed before he replied. The null appeared 67 years after the event. That's not that long for a God King. Now I understand what's going on here, Aster said, piquing their curiosity. The ability to transfer natives of a world to another world is a common ability to a God King, but it takes energy. Intense amounts of energy. But to offset this energy, most God Kings would go for a pact transfer instead. A pact transfer? The dwarven leader asked as Aster nodded. Yes. It's basically a transfer of a world to another, but under a preset condition which, once completed, will negate the transfer spell and enable the transferred to return to their world. This cuts the energy used by half, something a God King would prefer. So, based on my analysis, you all were sent here to Enderta not by any unnatural phenomenon, but by a God King, and definitely for a reason, since the energy required was too much for a God King to waste on sending you guys aimlessly. To cut the energy losses, he must have created a pact. And since the null appeared not long after you guys arrived, then the aim of the God King is pretty clear. He wants you all to aid the humans in the war against the nulls. And since you guys have not been able to devise a way back to your original world, then that must be the pact vow. The vow that, if you help the humans, whom I can guess were pretty weak, to fight against the nulls, once they've been defeated, the pact vow will activate and the process will be reversed, sending you all back to your original world. Pretty simple, no? Astralaxia said out loud, but the 10 leaders were blown away, all with their jaws hanging down. Simple? Simple? This was something their minds had never crossed, yet now it was all starting to make sense. This was better than the hypothesis they had formed and believed in their head. How it had never been so clear to them but had instantly been deciphered by the person before them was something their minds couldn't wrap around. Bullshit. We've already fought the nulls before and won. Why weren't we sent back then? The Titan leader, Borin, said with a scoff of mockery as the world turned to him. Yet, the face of everyone in the room changed as they watched Aster slowly raise her hand and stretch it toward Borin. In the next instant, Borin grabbed at his throat with both hands as his eyes flashed in horror, and then, a splash of blood burst out of his lips as his eyes widened with veins, and the entire group watched as he was raised into the air by an invisible force. His own hands firmly wrapped against his throat, as if preventing something from completely crushing his neck. I would watch how you talk to me if I were you. Aster's calm voice rang out through the room, as everyone's face changed seeing her hand still hanging out in the air toward Borin. She had been able to strangle his real body from the projection? That was the thought that rang through everyone's minds. But then, I apologize for his actions and assure you it won't be repeated, Miss Astralaxia. Please spare him. The voice of Sir Azrakan rang out, managing to disperse the pressure as Aster withdrew her hand, and they watched as Boren fell on his butt, his hand clutching his throat tightly as he coughed loudly, spewing blood everywhere. But then he regained himself, an angry expression appearing on his face, and he was about to curse out loud when Sir Azrakan warmed his throat, drawing Boren's attention. His teeth ground together before he reluctantly sat down on his seat, not saying a word. And once more, the room devolved into silence, with only a single person grinning in satisfaction, and it was none other than Mad White, who took intense delight from watching the man. The holorogist had made Boren say shit many times without getting punched in the face for it, but now he finally got his shit handed to him, in such a satisfactory way, too. If you ask why you fought Nulls before yet weren't sent back, Aster said, drawing back attention to the question Boren had asked, then my answer is that you never really defeated the Nulls in the first place. If I may ask you, what are the terms of defeat of the Null race? Aster asked them as Elias replied. When the Null Wars begin, they come in through portals. Many years ago we faced them and fought them, up until the 9th portal which we managed to defeat, and after which they never came in again. Some of them on the planet suddenly went into bizarre slumber. We had thought we had defeated them, but suddenly we sensed the chaos aura in the world increasing, and a few years later our sensors picked up a new Null emergence coming soon. And now we're in another war. But it is clear that we have once defeated the Nulls, Elia said. As Aster raised her hand once more, she asked, what power level was or were the Nulls that you faced in the 9th Null Gate appearance? The question brought silence to the room since many of the leaders here weren't very well aware of the exact numbers of the Null set that appeared in each gate. But the words of Sir Azrakan rang out not long after. It was a total of 100,000 Null Sleepers, about 35 to 40 Null Walkers and 12 Null Wanderers, he said, as easily as someone reading the lines of their palm. A shocked flutter went through the eyes of the leaders. That number was unthinkable. Equal to a 100,000 army of Grade C to be creatures, a total of 35 to 40 Grade B to a creatures, and 12 pseudo-eternal beings. It was an assemblage that could easily march through anything without being stopped. Yet somehow they had been able to come out on top still. And I'm guessing these wanderers are at the pseudo-eternal stages? Astralaxia followed up, resulting in a nod from Sir Azrakan. Then you didn't defeat the Nulls in the last war, she said, this time with a surety that surprised all. According to the hierarchy of Nulls as I know it, the Nulls are each targeted toward conquering a planet, and with every Null invasion, there is usually one assigned as the leader responsible for the army. Unless this one Null is defeated, then a Null army has never truly been defeated. You can think of it as having to seize the head of the king of an enemy army before being allowed to lay claim to the name defeat. And this Null will have at least a cultivation stage that will be anything but below the eternity stage. So there should be a higher stage of Null. One who is the king with a cultivation level at the eternity stage, possibly even above. If you didn't defeat it, then you haven't conquered the Null army? Astralaxia said to them, drawing deep breaths from the leaders. So there was still a higher level of Nulls. The Null Wanderers aren't the peak? Some of the leaders murmured amongst themselves, even as Sir Azrakan had his eyes flashing with light, seemingly coming to a realization before a smile appeared on his lips. Seems like we've judged things a bit too early, he said. Ryuk's eyebrows furrowed deeply as he remembered the last words of the blue-scaled Ryuk when he had last seen them. Could he be the one with my body part? He silently wondered to himself. If you're able to kill that Null that leads the rest of the army, then your world would have been noted to have conquered the Nulls. And only then would you get into consideration from a celestial world for protection, she said, drawing back their attention. A celestial world? It was a term they hadn't heard before. The Nulls' only menace isn't this world. They are in hundreds, if not thousands, of worlds like yours going through a Null invasion. The Nulls destroy life and thrive on chaos, and if allowed, they would reduce entire civilizations into a lawless existence. For this reason, a protection credential has been issued by the higher races, beings just as strong as the Nulls, if not stronger. They are known as the Celestial Race. To prevent the Nulls from endlessly feeding upon worlds and bringing chaos, they designed a pact that enables lower worlds to be under their protection, hence automatically stopping them from Null invasions. These worlds are referred to as Spirit Veil worlds, worlds under the protection of the Celestial Race and avoided by the Nulls, rendering them free from invasion. But there are millions of worlds out there, so the Celestials can't just be placing them all under the Astral Veil. There is a requirement, and that is by a particular world being able to at least survive a single Null army invasion, which End-Earth is currently facing. If you're able to survive this invasion, which you will do by getting rid of whoever is leading this Null battalion, then you will be noticed by a Celestial Race who will promote you to the Spirit Veil stage, and you will get onto their protection. This is the only way if you all wish for this world to survive. And I'm guessing if you're able to do that, then the pact made by the God King on those of you that have been transported here like the Nulls would be realized, and you will all be able to return back to your various worlds, leaving the original occupants, humanity, behind while they are protected as a Spirit Veil world and free from another invasion. She explained thoughtfully, as the leaders' ears perked up, various hypotheses flashing in their heads as they thought her words over and over again. But then, it just made perfect sense, and they found not even a hole they could explore. Everything seemed to perfectly align. And with how easily Aster said it, it wasn't like she was going on some guessing spree. She was fully confident of her words, which were gained from an in-depth knowledge that was no doubt beyond them. Now it all seemed so clear. A God King was able to predict the appearance of the Nulls on Enderath and to help the humans, who weren't even beginning to cultivate yet, summoned other races into the human planet to help fight against the incoming Nulls. Once the Nulls have been successfully defeated, the various races get to return back to their worlds, and Enderath will gain the qualification to become an Astral Veil world, coming under the control of a Celestial Race and forever preventing such an invasion from ever happening again. The humans avoid the fate of getting destroyed, and the others get to return to their original worlds. This is a perfect setting. A perfect setting that leads to the happiness of all. Ryuk mused calmly to himself, as each of the leaders remained quiet, even as a minute silently passed by. The words they were hearing were not just born of shock, but massive shock. It was hope, as they'd thought they were forever stuck on Enderath and would never get to leave. But now, they have been told their presence here isn't some phenomenon, but a meticulous plan of a higher being. And they would return, on fulfilling the conditions which have now been known to them. This was news that would cause uproar if released in their various races and families. Astralaxia remained silent after her explanation, allowing her words to sink well into the hearings of the leaders. She let the silence linger uninterrupted until Elias gained control of himself. I want to ask of something, and it might seem like disrespect, but I can assure you it isn't meant like that, and I do hope for your forgiveness. Elias began, drawing Astralaxia's attention. Ask away. If I deem it senseless, I will simply ignore it, she said, resulting in a swallow from Elias before he regained confidence. Is it possible for us to request some sort of proof of your statements? All of this, is your word, which might not be enough for us to place trust in, especially when considering the millions of lives of the various races that will depend on these words you've spoken. You would agree that we need some degree of truth that can be attached to your claims in the form of evidence. Elias said, even though his words were twisted around due to his attempt not to sound disrespectful. The idea was something everyone understood. They wanted more than just her words. They wanted proof. I have no proof to give, Astralaxia said, drawing furrowed eyebrows from everyone. To be honest, I don't care much if this world is destroyed at all. This won't be the first world destroyed by the Nulls, nor would it be the last. All I've said is because of him, she said, pointing to Ryuk. Proof of my words? I have none. I don't care if you believe or refuse it. All I know is that it at least makes more sense than the baseless hypotheses you all have been holding in your heads about the Nulls all this while. Hypotheses based on nothing but guesses and no substantial facts, she said, as brutally honest as possible, shaking everyone in the room. But it seemed Aster had no longer any patience to remain in there as she continued. I believe I have stated what you all must know about the Nulls. Your mission is simple: defeat the Null King and hopefully, the pact gets broken and you all get to return to your world while End-Earth gets under the protection of a celestial world and avoids another invasion of such. It can't be any simpler than that, Aster said, rising to her feet as she made her way to the door but suddenly stopped as she grabbed at the knob. And just a bit of warning. Prepare well for the Null King. This world wouldn't be the first world he has defeated, and your Eternity Stage experts definitely won't be the first Eternity Stage experts he has fought. He most likely has fought 1,000,000 of Eternity Stage experts and subdued them, taking their worlds by force. He won't be an easy foe, and unless you defeat him, then End-Earth will never escape its fate of being turned to Dark Gomer, meaning you all too will be getting buried here, Aster said before the doorknob turned and she left, the door shutting behind her firmly. This left the 10 leaders staring with widened eyes, Sir Azrakan, Mad White, and Ryuk alone in the massive room with nothing but silence. The 10 leaders had developed some rage from how she had acted, something that bordered on the line of disrespect. But then, when most of them thought back to her, they realized perhaps they were the ones who ought to have addressed her with respect. For it was clear, if all she had said was the truth, then she was way beyond their league. Well then, Mad White said, bringing attention back to the 10 leaders. Seems like we have fulfilled the other end of the deal as promised. Your acts of helping humanity in the war have been paid back just as promised, he said, referencing the deal that had made all of this happen. The deal for the 10 families to aid the humans in return for the gained knowledge from an Eternity Stage expert that knew more than all. Now they had also fulfilled their end of the deal. The silent affirmation was made when Boren's holographic image disappeared from the room, and soon, the elders gave a nod of acknowledgement to Mad White. For truly, he had fulfilled his duty of the deal. Now they both were equal, and silently, they all began leaving as quietly as they had come, until there was only a single person in the room. I'll be seeing you soon, Malric, Sir Azrakan said as Mad White rolled his eyes. Save your strength, Dad. End-Earth will be relying a lot on it in the upcoming wars if the words we heard today are true, Mad White said, waving him off as the man only chuckled before he returned his gaze to Ryuk. I've only been up for just a few days now, yet I can already hear your name amongst the Ascensions, he said, referencing Ryuk, who could only smile. It's a shame you're the one fighting 3 pseudo-eternal beings while the rest of us that should be fighting are having a nap. You have done a lot, young man. A real lot. But we've been awakened now. You can take some time off for now while resting assured that all will now be well handled by us, he said, and Ryuk nodded his head. I understand, sir. Good. If there's something you need, feel free to reach me through Malric. He can be a bonehead sometimes, but trust me, he dares not prevent you from a call to me. Goodbye now, the man said as he waved with a smile before his holograph slowly disappeared from the room. Ryuk waved as the holographic pins in the room slowly disappeared into the ground and he rose up, the chair beneath him retreating into the ground, dimming the hall into spaceless white once more. Now that is done, kid. Up for some feast. I just ate something not long ago though, Ryuk said as Mad White had found his to his shoulder, dragging him to the exit. Well then, I can bet on my life that you didn't have the best wine. Well, I had a glass of water. Ha 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 ha. Come. Let's get those taste buds excited for some real drinking. His boisterous laughter raged through the room as their backs slowly disappeared and they moved into the distance. The door shut close, returning the room to silence once more. 5 hours later. So, how are you feeling now? Mad White's voice rang out as he tapped Ryuk's shoulder. Ryuk turned his head toward him and then, a giggle echoed through the open space, coming from none other than Astralaxia, who stood to the side. Her hands covered her lips, yet she couldn't hold back her laughter as she looked at Ryuk. Right now, his pale white face had turned completely rosy pink, his eyes swirling with a bizarre tiredness mixed with helplessness. And then, a wave of liquid came bursting out of Ryuk's mouth, splattering all over the ground. Mad White calmly patted his back, saying, There. It'll go away soon. You bastard! Ryuk shouted as he slapped Mad White's arm away, resulting in a loud laugh of mockery from him. You said it was an ordinary. Another wave surged out as Ryuk vomited once more, splashing across the floor. He finally collapsed onto the ground, his chest heaving up and down. What's in the damn drink? He asked, panting. Mad White grinned wickedly. Just a little something to finally make you a man. Not much. TCH, you bastard. Ryuk could only force out before he began inhaling and exhaling heavily. It had all started from a simple wine drink with Mad White and Astralaxia. They had given him special bottles, claiming they were just for him. And Mad White had even forced him to take nearly 40 bottles during some stupid competition. Now, he couldn't stop vomiting everything out, and the damn system was just snickering silently, refusing to say anything helpful. Felt like the world was spinning. There were 5 moons in the sky instead of 1. But the more he breathed, the more the moons slowly disappeared, until just 1 remained. Slowly, he stopped heaving like a madman and regained control of himself. So, how do you feel now? Mad White asked again, his head popping up above Ryuk's. Ryuk only rolled his eyes. Go sleep already, Mad White. Your eye bags are too heavy, he said, noting the massive sleepless bags beneath Mad White's eyes. Ah, you're right. It's taking all I have to even remain on my feet. Then goodbye, Ryuk. There are hundreds of rooms below if you want to sleep. I'll be going first, he said as he made his way toward the mansion's exit, then stopped. And don't forget you're a loser. You lost the competition after all, he added with a smirk before disappearing down into the mansion below, even forgetting to close the door behind him. Ryuk could only roll his eyes as he watched it swing slowly back and forth, before turning his gaze back to the sky. The breeze wheezed past fast, whipping his hair around his face, his shirt flapping wildly. He fixed his gaze to the stars and the curved moon before taking in a deep, satisfying breath and exhaling loudly. Quite the mentor you've got there. Looks more like an elder brother than a mentor, a voice echoed. Ryuk opened his eyes and turned to the side, finding Astralaxia leaning on the railing, her gaze resting on his flushed face. TCH, you knew about it, didn't you? You both set me up, Ryuk accused, frowning. Astralaxia only rolled her eye. Get yourself together. You're more than old enough for that, she said unapologetically. Ryuk could only humph and turn away, ignoring her. Silence settled between them until, finally, Ryuk's frown faded and a bit of relief appeared on his face. Finally, I finished my part of the deal, he muttered, just loud enough for Aster to hear, though her expression remained serene. Finally, Ryuk thought again to himself. He had genuinely thought it would be difficult to convince Aster to appear before the 10 leaders and to ensure everything played out smoothly without making himself look like an immature fool. But in the end, everything had worked out, even though it required him to get another contract grimoire. But that was a decision he had made willingly. Ryuk knew if he truly wanted the greatest help from Aster, he had to give something in return. And what better gift than her freedom? Of course, giving her true freedom might have just led to her leaving. So instead, he made it a deal. For the sake of her freedom, Aster would help him defeat the Nulls. Once they were gone, she'd be free to go wherever she wanted, and he too would have gotten what he needed, to prevent Endearth from turning into a Dark Gomer. Why do I even care if Endearth doesn't become a Dark Gomer? It doesn't align with any of the goals I had in mind. Ryuk thought silently. His goal was simple. Find that bird Null and get more info on how to continue his journey. Learn its relationship with Uncle Bob and what really happened in the past. None of that had anything to do with Endearth surviving or not becoming a Dark Gomer. That wasn't part of his plan. Yet somehow that's what he now found himself fighting for too. Perhaps it's because Host has gained affection for Endearth, having grown up here, or because Host has developed quite the bond with humanity as a race, and doesn't wish to witness its eventual destruction. The system suggested. Ryuk's eyebrows furrowed for a moment, then relaxed. Whatever it is, I'm pretty sure Uncle Bob wouldn't frown at it. So I guess I must be doing the right thing, he thought to himself. His memories drifted briefly to the image of a gigantic snow-white creature flashing him a distinctly intelligent grin. I wonder how Isha is doing now. It's almost like she's been gone for countless years. Ryuk thought silently, but then the image soon appeared in his head, unconsciously causing his hands to fold up. And Morgaine too. TCH, how do I even fix this up after falling out with the half-fallen one? Call her up. Ryuk thought to himself as his hands reached up for his phone. He couldn't return back to her, but at least he got her number in his memories. His hands was about to reach his phone when a strange thought suddenly went into his head, and he paused in his step. Wait, how did I get tracked previously? He wondered to himself as his mind drifted back to when he had noticed he was being tracked. I was no doubt traced through my Apex watch, but the only one who has my number is Morgaine. Not the half-fallen one? That means I have been tracked through her device. He wondered to himself, as his eyes flashed and his hand, which was reaching for his device, paused mid-motion before retreating. If I'm being tracked through my device, then calling up her number will no doubt make them get my location. And now, I'm at Mad White's mansion. I might just be getting Mad White into trouble. I can't call her here. He thought to himself, exhaling a breath of relief before he focused back on the stars above. I'll find a way to get back to her and reassure her I'm okay. Don't want her getting too worried again. Ryuk mused, but then was awakened by her words. Worried about what? The voice rang out as Ryuk sat up, turning to look at Astralaxia, who had a curious expression on her face as she looked at him. Ha! You seemed pretty lost in thought, and I could swear your expressions went through 1,000 changes just now, she said, as Ryuk shrugged his shoulders. Just a couple of things not worth you sweating about, he said while rising to his feet, before moving forward to the edge of the balcony, looking at the expanse of green grass and the cars that lined the side, on Mad White's garage space. But then he looked far away, sighting the streets where various cars bolted by, dark jets that almost seemed to mix together with the night, blitzing past with speed. The motion of it all worked magic in calming down his emotions, seemingly entrancing in their length. Quite an advanced setting for a wild world, Aster suddenly called out, piquing Ryuk's attention. What do you mean? Technological devices equipped with mana-powered runes to boost their speed. Myriad of races, complex and different action. It's not quite like a wild world. Those are usually more simple, with everyone known for one thing and doing the same thing. Not much distinction, not much differentiation. Enderath seems almost no different from an upper world, due to its number of different races coming together and coexisting. Aster said, the faintest bit of amazement in her voice as Ryuk's eyebrows creased before he understood it and nodded his head. I guess it would have looked no different from a wild world, if the other races were never brought here. There would have been only humans in it, and I doubt all of this would be possible if it was only the humans. He muttered aloud, resulting in a nod from Aster. You seem to care about them, the humans, she said, and Ryuk nodded. Why is that? She followed, as Ryuk turned to look at her, staring into those blue depths before he nodded. Because I'm one? He responded, but then watched as Aster shook her head. You're not a human. Just like the other races, your source energy radiates in a signature different from this planet. You don't belong too, Aster said, as Ryuk creased his eyebrows. Amongst all other people in Enderath, not a single person knew he wasn't human, except for Astralaxia. And that was due to her ability to identify the strange surge of source energy of every inhabitant of a world. There was no point lying about it. Nobody in the world knows that, so I'll like to keep it a secret, and while I'm not biologically a human, I consider myself one still. You decided to ally with them against the other races? She asked, as Ryuk shrugged his shoulder. I guess that's one way to put it. If he isn't a human, then what is he? His aura is so special. I can't sense a second one like his on this world. Could he be like me? Completely from a different place. Why does he seem to be hiding that fact? And why do the people here not seem to know about it? Why do I feel like he would be rejected if they knew what he was? What race is he even? 1,001 questions came into Aster's mind, but in the end, she decided to remain silent. She too was not from this world, and Ryuk had never asked her any overly personal question as to what race she was. He could, but didn't, meaning he was probably respecting her privacy. Perhaps it was time to repay that by also not overly interfering in his business. What are you planning to do next, Aster? Ryuk asked, drawing her attention. If I may guess, perhaps growing stronger and reaching the next true stage? He asked as she nodded. Obviously, just because I have a way out doesn't mean I want my strength to lag behind. Fine by me. But you do realize going around and sucking out people's soul power isn't the best way, right? Ryuk said, as Aster creased her eyebrows. We need our strength if we're to fight the nulls. A person like you, or to be more concise, your power is very dangerous. One that can absorb soul power and weaken us. If we're weakened and then have to fight the nulls too, then our defeat is pretty certain, Ryuk pointed out, and she didn't need to think about it twice before realizing it was the truth. Her reason for absorbing soul power was because she had wanted to quickly regain her power and get free from Ryuk's control. It came at a side effect, but it was worth it if she was able to leave Ryuk's control. But now that she was on his side, and was also looking forward towards defeating the nulls, then she had no need to be taking such extreme measures to cultivate her energy. I know. I did that because I almost had no choice. But now, the options are different. I'll just go the normal route of cultivating Etheric energy. It's surprisingly pretty abundant here, maybe because no one cultivates it. Aster mused as Ryuk's eyes flashed, but then her eyebrows creased as she turned to him. Wait, you also cultivate Etheric, don't you? Astralaxia asked, and Ryuk nodded his head. Technically, I'm capable of it, I think. But then, this world doesn't, so I don't really have a basic manual on how to. Heck, I don't even know the cultivation stages of Etheric, Ryuk replied as Aster nodded her head. That makes some sense. I've seen many cultivators during my time wandering around here, but never a single Etheric cultivator. I'm pretty sure you must be the only one, and since you are, you probably have no idea about it at all. Just that you can, Astralaxia said, matching Ryuk's thoughts. I'm curious, what level have you been able to reach blindly? What dimensions have you unlocked? She asked, as Ryuk raised an eyebrow. Dimension? Yes. Like skills? She said, as his eyes flashed and he slowly stretched his hands toward hers. Suddenly, it stopped just an inch before it could reach, and Aster watched with curious eyes as she noticed veins begin popping up on all of Ryuk's arm, revealing he was trying all he could to touch her hands, yet seemed to be halted by an inch. Voluntarily, she moved her hand forward to meet Ryuk's. But then, her hand also didn't move an inch, even as she began exerting strength. But then, cracks suddenly began appearing in the air as Aster's eyes flashed and they both withdrew their hands. You can solidify the space with your will? Astralaxia asked with an interested expression, and Ryuk nodded. Yes, but that's all I can do though. Huh. Aster showed an expression of disbelief from his words. I told you, I'm still new to Etheric. Still haven't placed much focus on it. He replied as Aster nodded. If so, you're still pretty far behind. Can you show me? Ryuk suddenly asked. What? Aster replied. Show me how far behind I am. I haven't really seen Etheric in power before. I don't know what it can really do except, well, solidify the air, Ryuk said, laughing with a bit of mockery, as Aster scoffed. It's you that can only solidify the air. Pretty basic use of Etheric. I doubt there is something more basic than that. This instead, Aster said as she rose up from her reclining position, a single bizarre blue ring appearing in her eyes, prompting Ryuk to straighten himself up in focus, as he watched Aster slowly stretch her hand to him and then, is the true power of Etheric, she completed before she flicked her fingers together. The sensation Ryuk felt was the same as being lifted through a space wormhole. Yet this time it was different as he felt himself still remaining on his feet, still standing on the structure, yet the world had become a painting. Painting of blue with no end. With shock in his eyes, he watched as the feeling of solidification beneath his feet disappeared, and he began sinking into the ground, soon soaring downward with speed, with eyes in absolute shock. What's happening? Ryuk wondered, watching himself sink through walls as if they ceased to exist. But then, he watched as Astralaxia magically appeared before him, her hand stretching toward his face, and then, her finger flicked once more, and when Ryuk opened his eyes, he was in the clouds, soon freely falling downward, unable to control himself. But his eyes flashed when he saw the ground on the floor soon lifting up, inching towards him. He clenched his fists, trying to punch through, but then, it was the same feeling as punching through the air, as he watched the huge floor weave through his body. He turned his body, watching the sight of the rock floating in the air, and sitting down leisurely was none other than Astralaxia, whose blue eyes stared at him with a calm expression. What is this? Where are we? Ryuk asked in shock. He could still see the structures, albeit in a strange copy of pale blue with blue particles floating around. He could still see the cars that were weaving by with speed, albeit much slower to his gaze, all also covered in that same blue energy. He watched as a bizarre blue butterfly flew past him and his hands reached out to touch it, yet weaved through his fingers like he didn't exist, before making its way to Astralaxia and calmly resting on her finger. You're the only one with a physical form. I seem to have lost that, and therefore lost physical touch with the world too? It's like I'm ceasing to exist in the physical, Ryuk muttered, voicing his observation even as he soared downwards, and he could barely notice, even though he had been soaring downward with speed, the floor beneath seemed to get farther and farther away, making him stuck in eternal falling. And when he turned beside him, he found Aster with her gigantic platform floating by his head, falling at the same exact speed as he was. This is called a dimension. Specifically, the Azar dimension. The closest dimension to reality. A dimension where the concept of realness in physicality is but an illusion to anything that hasn't gained its favor. You will weave through anything that is physical, and even if you hold a weapon, you will weave through it, rendering whatever weapon you may have useless, since the dimension renders all physicality null, ultimately resulting in you never getting a hold of it. It's the first dimension that the cultivation of Etheric energy will give you. A sign of acknowledgement towards your knowledge of it, Astralaxia explained, tingling the wings of the butterfly on her palms. Before her gaze focused and she raised her hand into the air, the butterfly flying away. Ryuk's mind reeled from her explanation. A dimension beyond reality. A place where the concept of physicality has no meaning. He had never heard of it before, neither had his mind crossed it. But that isn't all there is, Aster said as she raised her finger up once more, and then, once more, she flicked her finger as the same sensation descended into Ryuk, the sensation of rapidly descending through a wormhole. But this time, when he felt the shift stabilize, pure shock appeared in his gaze. The world had once more changed, yet never changed. The buildings were still there, the streets, the beauties, the ground, Aster, and her floating platform. But this time, the entire world was like a painting of black and white. And in this bizarre world, Ryuk himself was half divided into black and white. Even Astralaxia. But then, Ryuk's eyebrow furrowed when he felt a bizarre sensation before his eyes widened in shock. I have lost contact with Apex energy? No. There is no longer Apex energy even in the air at all? He wondered in shock as he turned to look at Aster, noticing that another circular blue ring had appeared in her eyes, making it two. This is the Ashra dimension. A dimension where the concept of energy is nothing but an illusion. Here, energy can never reach no matter its form. Apex energy, abyssal energy, Etheric energy? They can never touch the periphery of this dimension, and hence, you can no longer absorb Apex energy anymore, Aster said calmly as Ryuk's heart unconsciously began pounding faster. One beat from fear, and one from excitement. One had to know, Apex energy is automatically absorbed even as cultivators go about their day-to-day lives. Hay are usually always mini-cultivating. Even if a cultivator is in battle, his skin automatically absorbs Apex energy and refills his reserves. Even better during intense physical activity, making them last longer. It has the same effect as one in a fight breathing in oxygen. But this dimension severs energy. That means his body was no longer absorbing Apex energy, and if he got into battle here, he would fall exhausted pretty quickly because he can't absorb any more Apex energy to refill himself. But even in this dimension, there is a mini-dimension. A dimension of absolute negativity to the function of the Ashra dimension, Aster said as Ryuk watched her slowly rise to her feet, both of her hands coming together into a forming triangular symbol. Dimension opening art. Descent of Sharon Zero World. Aster's voice reverberated as Ryuk felt a ripple blast through his body, passing through him, and then, with widened eyes, he watched as Aster began radiating color. Her skin turned into its normal white color, another third ring appearing in her eyes. Her blue hair gently floated behind her. Various runic lines appeared all over her face like tattoos. But that wasn't all. He watched as a massive amount of Etheric energy began meandering around Aster like a cloud, causing her power level to skyrocket beyond before. I don't understand. Ryuk mused as Aster took a single step forward, and in the next instant, she was floating before Ryuk, flailing after him horizontally yet keeping the mid-distance. The third dimension of Etheric, the dimension of Sharon. A dimension that negates the effects of the Ashra dimension. If the Ashra dimension removes all energy that is present in the air, then the Sharon dimension is like a pin puncturing a balloon filled with air. Asterlaza explained as Ryuk's brain whirled at full speed, his eyes winding in realization. If the Ashra dimension is like a balloon that houses all the energy, preventing them from seeping outside, then the Sharon dimension works in opposite. Like puncturing a hole in a balloon causing the air to be released. In this case, all the energy will be released outward, and now you're the only one in the Sharon dimension, which means all the energy leaking will go to you. That gives you access to all the energy of an entire dimension, while I, stuck in the Ashra dimension, will be unable to access even the slightest amount of energy at all? Ryuk asked in disbelief. You would be getting stronger and regaining your power while I will keep getting degraded? Aster grinned massively. In here, Ryuk, I can one-shot you to death, she said as her grin widened further. She stretched out her hands as Ryuk tried to back off, yet he felt all of his motion unable to initiate at all. He could only watch helplessly as Aster's hand slowly reached out and landed on his chest, and then, "Goodbye," she said. Ryuk's eyes dilated in shock as he felt a powerful sensation. The sensation of being descended fast into something. But when he regained himself, he found himself freely soaring through the air, and quickly, he rolled before his leg landed on the tiled ground. He laid on it, crouched, sweat dripping down the corner of his face, as intense cold air left his lungs. He raised his gaze to find Aster gently descending onto the ground from the sky. The gray color of the world was gone now. The entire world had returned to its normal color, with everything resuming its normal state. So tell me, how does Etheric energy feel? Aster asked with a cunning smirk, watching as a vein popped on Ryuk's head. Anger-filled eyes burning before they suddenly disappeared, replaced by, "Ha ha ha." He suddenly burst out in laughter, going on for almost a minute straight, wheezing toward the end before he could finally stop himself. Aster, you really got me there. The first time I have ever been so helpless, Ryuk called out as Aster grinned sinisterly at him. I take back my words. Etheric is an energy beyond, Ryuk stated, bringing a smile of acknowledgement to Astralaxia's face. Yes, it is. The Sharon dimension is the third dimension, and it grants one the power of a nascent god in the dimension of Sharon. There are about 5 dimensions of Etheric energy, and in an ancient tome I've read, it is said that the total number of dimensions is 9 instead. Can you imagine, Ryuk, the power a being will wield if he holds the power of the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, up to the 9th dimension in his hands? Wouldn't the word God fit such a being? Astralaxia asked, as Ryuk watched her eyes flash with intense, soul-stirring desire, one that he felt familiar to only himself. It will, Aster. It will. Ryuk's attention had never been on Etheric energy. Even though he could cultivate it and probably had the manual for it in the shop, he had never considered it a priority because he never really thought it was that capable of much power. He felt it more right to focus on improving his apex energy cultivation instead. But that was because, deep in his mind, he wasn't that impressed by Etheric energy. He was never aware of its true capability, and that process made him think of it as lesser, something that wasn't worth focusing on compared to improving his apex energy cultivation. But now, his heart was soundly beating in excitement. For now, he could say without a doubt that Etheric was an energy that wouldn't even pale next to apex energy. If anything, it was more overpowering than it, and now he felt the intense urge. The urge to cultivate it and unlock the dimensions. Do you ever think you could reach such a level, Astralaxia? To possess the power to control the ninth dimension? He asked her curiously, as Astralaxia turned to look at him, staring him long in the eye for a while, until a level that would make anyone feel uncomfortable. But Ryuk kept his gaze locked into her blue eyes, watching as the blue circular rings in them began fading away, revealing her brilliant blue core within, and she slowly took her gaze away. It sounds crazy to think about, doesn't it? The power of the ninth dimension. The absolute peak of Etheric energy. Aster asked, as Ryuk simply listened. But for as long as I live, I will keep chasing that peak. That very peak of power. The power of the ninth dimension harnessed on my fingertips, she said, unconsciously raising her fingers as blue energy curled around them, until it faded away. As she turned to look at Ryuk, a bizarre expression forming across her face. What's with that face? She asked. Right now, Ryuk was grinning like a madman, his mouth widening until it reached his ears, making him look like a demon. Ha! Ryuk said as he felt himself brought back to reality, his grin receding just as swiftly. Oh, seems like I fell into a trance from your godlike description, he said with a smile as Astralaxia rolled her eyes. Getting dreamy. Seems fair since it's night, but that is too far away. To reach the first dimension at all can take at least 20 years, and that time is doubled by around 5 times to reach the second dimension. Easier to reach the third though once the second is reached. The cultivation of Etheric takes more years than apex energy, but it is very well worth it in the end, she explained as Ryuk's eyes flashed. Makes sense. For such an overpowering energy, it would be weird if it's so easy to reach, he thought, but then a second thought occurred in his head as he looked at Aster with his jaw faintly hanging, an expression Aster didn't fail to see. What is it again? She asked, as Ryuk closed his lips and muttered, Well, it's just, I was wondering if it takes 20 years to reach the first dimension, and 5 times that to reach the second stage. That means you're easily more than 120 years old? He asked in shock. But Astralaxia had the same expression on her face, a neutral calmness. Sorry, I just didn't know you were an old woman, he said. But then, vroom, the air flashed by as Ryuk dodged his head in an instant, the air above his head blasting to the side, and in the end, he stepped his leg onto the ground, instantly reappearing a few distance away, only to turn and see Aster in the motion of slapping the place where Ryuk's head ought to have been. What the hell? Ryuk screamed in shock, as Aster slowly took her hand back. Seems like no one ever told you. The ultimate disrespect to a lady is calling her old, Astralaxia said with a faint squint on her face, and Ryuk could only swallow. My bad. But what the heck? You wanted to slap my head off? He asked in horror as Aster shrugged her shoulders. I can't kill you because of the contract grimoire, so you would have been fine. A little slap though, I bet would do more help to you than bad, she said, something that made Ryuk roll his eyes. Anyway, Ryuk, what do you plan to do now? What are your next plans? Aster asked, curious as Ryuk furrowed his eyebrows. And why do you want to know that? He asked, and she replied, because I'm stuck with you now. Remember your second command, which is to come with you. I can't get 300 meters away from you anymore. I'm literally stuck around you unless you take back your command. So I need to know what your next plan is before I'm forced to endure it, she said as Ryuk's eyes flashed. He truly had ordered her to come with him during the Lottie's kingdom, and he had used the contract grimoire order forcing her to always remain around him now, even though that was never his intention. Oh, what I want to do? He asked, his gaze furrowing before he responded. I want to improve my strength. The war situation might be well balanced now, since the old monster has been awakened, and the 10 families know what they're fighting and can better prepare. But still, I want to improve my strength. Who knows how the future can turn out? And when it comes to improving my cultivation, I want to begin the cultivation of my Etheric energy, Ryuk answered as Aster's eyes flashed. Good then. I also want to return to the cultivation of my Etheric energy, so I guess our plans go together, she said, as Ryuk nodded. If so, then I found a place where Etheric energy is at the maximum. Although I didn't get to check it out because I had better plans. But now, maybe we should both give it a check?